Okay, I think some people are still in the process of joining, but we now have over 100 participants. So I think we can definitely get this webinar started. So hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Jouven. I am the director of the SME Climate Hub. It is my pleasure to welcome you today for this Small Business Saturday webinar. We should have hundreds of SMEs joining us today from different countries, including the US and the UK. So we're very excited about this event, and we certainly hope you are too. Now, this is a time of the year, especially in the US and in the UK, where we celebrate and we support small businesses and all that they do for our local communities. But we also know that in the current economic context, quite tough, small businesses need our support more than ever. So we really wanted to use this opportunity to reflect specifically on why building climate resilience is important for small and medium-sized enterprises. And we have a fantastic lineup of speakers with us today to help us do so. Now, as you can see on the slide, we'll be covering a number of things. We'll look at the role of SMEs in the fight against climate change. We'll also talk about the business value of taking climate action, incredibly important, especially in this context, to help small businesses prioritize their daily activities. We'll also do a bit of a demo of the SME Climate Hub, this platform that we're managing to ensure that you're fully aware of the tools and support that we offer and can make the best use of it. And then most importantly, we'll be hearing directly from SMEs in the US and in the UK who have taken steps to reduce their emissions, who are using the SME Climate Hub and seeing success as a result. We're thrilled to have El Saha, Adormi, and Forster Communications with us. I'll introduce our speakers in just a few minutes. I just wanted to note that there's an audience Q&A that is available. There's a button at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to type your questions during the session. We'll do our best to answer them. So we'll either answer them directly in writing, or we have a couple of moments during the event where we'll have a proper Q&A session. So we definitely hope that this is going to be an interactive event. And now that we've covered the basics, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, who's Ryan Finnegan, Deputy Manager for US Climate Policy Action at America is All In. America is All In is one of our key partners in the US, and Ryan manages its alliance of mayors, governors, businesses, healthcare executives, university presidents. So he's definitely well placed to provide more context on Small Business Saturday and also how this links back to climate action and community resilience. So over to you, Ryan.
Thanks so much, Pamela. It's really wonderful to be here and have the opportunity to speak as part of this event. As Pamela mentioned, my name is Ryan Finnegan. I work at the World Wildlife Fund, in which I help to manage the America is All In coalition. Communities, businesses, other non-federal leaders who are really embracing a whole of society mobilization on climate within the United States. And I think, it's a form of coalition building that is really broadly applicable across the rest of the world. What we try and do at America is All In is bring together the public sector and the private sector and institutional leadership that want to go further and farther than maybe where their local governments are going or the federal government is going. And when there are opportunities to kind of embrace policy or to build partnerships with one another, to affect policy and to affect emissions reduction or build resilience, helping to provide that across, as Pamela listed, those wide-ranging groups of constituencies. But I'm really thrilled to be speaking with this group today, because when we talk about whole of society, when we talk about the players in the US economy and in the global economy who are both affected by and impacted by climate change, we have to really understand and embrace the role of small and medium-sized businesses, because the global economy depends on the health of SMEs. And if we're defining SMEs or small and medium-sized businesses as businesses with fewer than 500 employees, in the United States alone, there are over 30 million SMEs. And the businesses that are categorized as SMEs are responsible for 2/3 of job creation in the United States. So it's personal for everyone, right? I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., where I work for a larger nonprofit organization. My brother is a small business entrepreneur out in Colorado who manages his own small business. My other brother and my mother work in New York at a family-run enterprise. And that runs the gambit. Those are both on the smaller end of the SME scale. But as you get up into 500, the impact is really immense, and it touches every corner of our economy. But I want to talk about that impact and apply it to the climate conversation and talk about the resilience of communities, and how that resilience of communities and the need to build resilience within our communities comes back to the local operators within our communities, who are so often SMEs. We know that delaying climate action has its costs. It has had its costs over the past 10, 20, 30 years. Decades have gone by, and both the US and the world is still making a pivot to really understand climate impacts, and figure out how the future of our economies are going to work and be set up given climate disruption. They are disrupting supply chains, threatening our infrastructure, and not every, the learning curve for adapting and understanding is often rough. And SMEs very often are on the front lines. Very oftentimes, there are already various risks that folks are facing in managing and operating a business and supporting employees and supporting customers. Adding climate disruption into that is one other thing on a long list of impacts. And oftentimes the staff, the bandwidth capacities, the in-house expertise isn't always there when we're talking about how best to prepare our operations or prepare our supply chains and get a handle on how we can be most impactful. And so 2022 has been a year in which certainly there have been climate impacts felt around the world. But there's also been growing inflation, increased energy costs, lingering supply chain disruptions, from the past few years of the pandemic, increased supply chain disruptions, whether it's, events in Europe or otherwise. And so we understand that there's kind of a myriad of competing demands, but I think what there is also an increased understanding and expectation is the interconnectedness of climate as a lens through which folks can understand the future of the economy, the future of businesses, and learning how to navigate, retool, and pivot towards a more resilient business plan, business structure, and figuring out how to learn and educate and take advantage of resources that have not previously existed but are coming into fruition. I think the past couple of years have really marked this pivot point in which, we understand climate to not just be something that happens at like the high echelons of negotiations between countries, but because its impacts and, the fight really comes down to the local community level. And so filling in that resource capacity gap is a big component of it. And so really excited to kind of be able to use this event to dive into the resources that are coming into fruition for SMEs. The SME Climate Hub has been an incredible partner for America is All In, and we're really excited to kind of see the growth of the use of these tools and resources for SMEs who, again, might not have all the existing in-house capacity as a major business or, a city with a sustainability team, or, a large healthcare organization, anything like that. And so really excited that in a few minutes, Pamela will be walking through the tools and resources. Because I think in the United States, we're really excited by the opportunities that are presented to us right now. As America's All In, we've been really appreciative to know that there's going to be federal investment in climate for the first time in at its scale. It's the first time ever that the United States is really investing monumental finances into the climate fight here at home. And so many of the incentives that have been passed in Congress in the past few months are incentives that can be taken advantage of by SMEs. And so we're really excited for that implementation to go forward. We want to support SMEs with policy advocacy as well as in reducing their emissions and building resilience. And are really excited to be doing that in partnership with We Mean Business, with the SME Climate Hub, and then with all of the SMEs that have been part of the Americas All In Coalition, all SMEs who might be sitting in a different location globally, but who work and interact with SMEs and other constituencies in the United States. And so very grateful to be here. And Pamela, very grateful to toss it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for setting the scene in such an eloquent way. I'm sure that many of the points that you raise will have resonated with our audience members. And I didn't know there were so many small business owners in your family. Hopefully this makes this work even more interesting, and I hope they're joining us today. So before we hear firsthand from some of the businesses who've joined our community, the community of the SME Climate Hub, we wanted to do a bit of a demo of the tools that we offer on the platform to make sure that, once this webinar is over, you can go check them out and start using them if you're not doing so already. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. Once again, there's a Q&A box that's available. Feel free to post your questions, and we'll also have about 10 minutes after the demo to cover any questions that you might have. So here we are. This is the homepage of the SME Climate Hub. So first things first, maybe the hub is a joint initiative of different nonprofit organizations called the Women Business Coalition, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. We're also in close partnership with the United Nations Race to Zero campaign, and I'll come back to this point in just a few minutes. But this is essentially what the hub looks like. It was designed as a one-stop shop, basically a single platform that provides small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, with all the tools that they need to begin their journey to reduce carbon emissions. So when you land on the hub, you can see that there's a big yellow button that says Get Started, and you're given two options. You can make the commitment that we've created for SMEs. I'll come back to that in a minute, if you already know about this and are comfortable doing so. But for most SMEs, well, it will make sense to start the journey with us. We've created a specific page that walks you potentially through a journey. Now, if you click on this button, Start the Journey, you land on our How It Works page that really breaks things down for SMEs. So first of all, we highlight specific tools that we have created for SMEs. So these tools have been specifically designed to meet small business needs and to help them understand where they stand. So we have a business carbon calculator that allows you to measure your footprint. I'll come back to that. We also have an online education course called Climate Fit. Just so we're clear, these two resources, as well as all the other tools and resources that we have on the hub, are completely free of charge. I'll show you what this course looks like in just a minute. And then we also highlight other resources that we think SMEs might find helpful. Now, once SMEs have gained a better understanding of where they stand, we encourage you to publicly commit. So we have created a very simple commitment for small and medium-sized businesses that is aligned with science. So with the goal of keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees, in line with the Paris Agreement that was signed back in 2015. And as you can see, there are only three components in this commitment. It's about halving your emissions before 2030, reaching net zero before 2050, and also sharing your progress on a yearly basis. So basically, reporting on your progress each year, starting from 18 months after you make this commitment. And the great thing is that when you make this commitment, you join the United Nations Race to Zero campaign, which is the biggest campaign ever launched, managed by the United Nations, that brings together governments, but also businesses and other stakeholders to work towards net zero. So this comes with a certain degree of recognition and also benefits, as you will see, because once you make the commitment, this unlocks personalized resources and incentives for you to use. So we're working on additional tools, especially action models that will focus on specific actions that your business can take. We have also literally just launched a reporting tool to help you disclose your progress to key stakeholders and unlock additional benefits. And we're actually working with a large ecosystem of partners, both at a global level and at a local level in some geographies, to make sure that SMEs are incentivized really to take action and make this commitment. So this is really what the process looks like. But I also wanted to do a bit of a deep dive into some of our tools. So let's start first with the business carbon calculator. So when you click on calculate, it brings you to this page here that provides a bit more background on the tool and how it functions. So it explains why calculating your emissions is a critical first step. To put things simply, you need to understand where your emissions hotspots are to take, the right actions for your business. It also provides a bit more context on how the calculator works, stories of other SMEs who've used the tool, and also we have a bit of a Q&A section here in case you're wondering about, the methodology that is used, or how this tool is different from, others that might be accessible online. So if you decide to calculate your emissions, to use the calculator, you can click on calculate. You land on this page here, which is part of Normative's website. So we've developed this calculator with a partner called Normative and with support from google.org. And you just need to sign up to use the calculator. We've made it as accessible as possible, but we need obviously a few data points to make sure that you can use the calculator. So that includes obviously an email address so that we can create an account for you. And as part of the sign up process, you're also asked to provide your company's name, but also the country that you're based in and the sector that you operate in, because we need to use specific country factors and sector factors to make sure that we provide you with the right estimates. Now, once you've done so, you land on this page. As you can see, this tool is extremely slick, extremely simple. The idea is to help SMEs get really accurate estimates by only asking them a few simple questions. I'll walk you through this. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. So of course, we need to understand the time period you want to calculate your emissions for. So let's say that we want to do this for the last calendar year. And by way of background, I've created a fake account for this demo. So we're talking about a small company based in the UK that works in the retail sector, but it's extremely random. And throughout the demo, I'll be using extremely random numbers. The idea is just to show you how this tool works. So let's say that we're doing this for the last calendar year. As you can see, you're also asked questions, very simple questions about your business, such as the number of employees that you have, your company's revenue, let's use, round numbers for the sake of this exercise. And then a few more questions about the vehicles that you use, maybe any machinery that your business is using, but also, say, the size of your facilities. And you also have the option from time to time to say, I don't know. So our assumption is that if you have all the information at hand for this, it will only take you a few minutes to fill in all the forms that are required to get your estimates. But we've also heard from businesses who've had to, look for this information, and most of them were able to do this in just 1 or 2 hours. Now, let's keep going. We also have questions about how much electricity your company consumes. So we have a small office, let's say 100 kilowatt per hour per square meter, let's say 10,000. Next question is about, the type of electricity that you use. Again, we're working with a few assumptions here. Let's say we're very into renewables, and we also ask about your heating and how much you consume. Again, let's use round numbers for the sake of the exercise. So by answering these questions, we've basically covered the first 2 sections, the one on company data and the one on fuel and energy. So these questions help us estimate your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So emissions that are coming from your own operations or from the energy that you purchase and that you use. And the last section of this tool about expenses helps us provide you with estimates of your scope 3 emissions. So emissions that are coming from your supply chain, which are often very hard to measure. And we use spent data for this. So once again, I'll be using very random figures here so that you can see how the tool works. So we look at your expenses, and then we look at, how we can break them down into different categories. So in terms of business travel, maybe like a few train tickets, a few flight tickets, let's skip bus and car rental. Let's assume that you don't need any hotels. Transport, I'm a retail company, I might need a bit more. Again, let's use random numbers here. Let's say that I use road freight, air freight, maybe rail freight. And let's skip the other categories. And then in terms of materials and inventory, I don't want to take up too much time. So let's say that I've been buying chairs, tables, textiles, maybe I'm selling clothes. So let's put a bit more here. There are other categories, as you can see. And then capital goods, of course, there are a few things to take into account here. Once again, round numbers to make it quick. And services, and actually I've already exceeded the total number that I initially provided. So I'm just gonna, change some of this. That is why, that explains it. And then services, so a few more things here, legal services. Again, round numbers. As you can see, there's a progress bar at the top that helps you understand whether you're covering your expenses. So right now I'm doing okay according to the tool. And then we'll just add a few more figures here to make sure that we get as close as possible to these like 800,000. And that brings us to like a good total. Let's say you might not have all the figures that you need, but this is enough to calculate emissions. So if I click on calculate emissions, you'll see that the tools take a few minutes to think, and that brings us to this dashboard. Of course, this is far from accurate, but you can see that you have a breakdown of your emissions by scope, but also by type of activity, purchase goods and services, capital goods, business travel, upstream, transportation, and distribution. You can download this report, and you can also use an additional tool developed by Normative to understand how your business compares to similar businesses that are based in the same country and in the same sector. So that's, in a nutshell, the business carbon calculator. Now, let's have a look at the other tools that we have. So as you will remember, on this page, we also highlight additional tools for SMEs to use. That starts with Climate Fit, our online education course. Once again, in order to use Climate Fit, you only need to register. So you only need to provide an email address so that we can monitor your progress. Once again, you have a bit of a progress bar here. And once you do that, you gain access to the full course. There are 7 modules in this course that cover everything from climate strategy and governance all the way to operations, supply chain, product design, even employee communication. So I often call this Climate Action 101 for a small business. Each module takes about 30 minutes to complete. So I'll just quickly show you what one of these modules look like. We have this one, for example, which is Climate Action for your operations. As you can see, we have a bit of an introduction. We've tried to make this as fun and accessible as possible. So we've created videos with athletes to draw a bit of a comparison between performance in climate action and performance in sport. So I definitely encourage you to watch some of these. But as you can see, we also provide a lot of background information. We explain key concepts. So in this case, around energy efficiency, renewable energy, fleet emissions. But then we've also tried to make this interactive. So there are specific sections where you can leave feedback or just make sure that you have a good understanding or that you can dig a little deeper into some of the research that's been conducted. And we also have, if we keep scrolling down here, you'll see that we have case studies to make this even more tangible for you. So we have videos, additional content, There's really a lot in this course. It's a fantastic resource, and we always try to summarize things for you a little bit towards the end, maybe provide checklists to make it as actionable as possible and make sure that you go away with the right takeaways. Now, very quickly, because I know that we're short on time, I wanted to show you the last 3 tools, starting with the financial support guide that we've created for SMEs. Now, this is a high-level resource that helps you understand where to get funding from to take action. Of course, things will vary a lot from one country to the other, even from one sector to the other, but that provides you with a good understanding of where to get started. So, there are different stakeholders that you could approach, from buyers to banks, maybe government with specific grants, or investors. And for each one of them, we help you understand, well, how to approach these conversations. We provide a bit of background. We help you prepare for these discussions. We highlight what you could ask, and we even provide email templates in some cases to make it as easy as possible for you. And similar to Climate Fit, we also provide case studies and a few summary tables to make sure that you can really digest this content. Last but not least, we have the tools library. It's a library that is created by the Net Zero team at Oxford University that brings together other resources created by third parties or other partners. We've tried to keep the user experience as simple as possible on the hub, of course, but we're conscious that some SMEs will want to dig a little deeper. So we have all these tools that you're free to browse. We've highlighted the top net zero tools, so the ones that SMEs tend to go to more often, but we also have a full library with specific filters that you can use here to find the resources that are right for you and complement the tools that I just highlighted. And I said last but not least that it's not entirely true, because we've just launched a reporting tool that we're currently testing with a few SMEs, and that's going to go live on the website in a few days. And this tool is meant to help you report your progress to key stakeholders. Obviously, it's a way for us to, make sure also that you're on the right track, that you're working towards emissions reductions. But ultimately, this is a fantastic way for you to communicate progress to buyers or banks, basically stakeholders who will want to know that you're trying to become more sustainable as a business. There are a few mandatory sections, as you will see. There's a red asterisk here, so that denotes the mandatory sections that cover, some basic data reporting here and the likes, your commitments and your targets. As you will see, we've also added specific explanations to make sure that you fully understand what this is all about. We ask a few questions about your emissions. Obviously, the tools that I just walked you through will help you fill in these different forms. We also want to hear about the actions that you're taking. That's really helpful for us to know, also to make sure that we can keep supporting you. And on top of that, we have some optional sections that we've added around value chain emissions, because we know that this is not going to be easy for everyone. So we want SMEs to first start focusing on their scope 1 and 2 emissions. So, emissions coming from their own operations or the energy that they use, and then gradually also start looking at emissions coming from their supply chains. And then we also know that some stakeholders, such as banks or investors, will be very interested in hearing about any climate solutions that you're developing as a business, or even how you're managing, how you're approaching management and strategy internally. So, reporting on these different pieces might actually open additional doors for you and help you work with specific banks. These reports will be downloadable, so you'll be able to download those, again, to use with different stakeholders. And we certainly look forward to hearing from you on how this works. I'll stop here because I know that we wanted to have some time for questions, and I'll have a look. So we have questions that I think are both in the chat and in the Q&A box. So let's have a look at the Q&A box. Very specific questions here. So I don't know if Sasha, you have any suggestions in terms of which ones to answer. Let's start from, there's some policy questions. So I just want to make sure that we can cover off any questions that are related to the tools. themselves. Okay. There's a tool, right? There's a calculator. Right, so we have some comments from Martina, for example, who joined before COP26 and are just finding out about these tools now. So I'm glad we're organizing this demo now. So I think we can cross that off the list. Rob Bartnick is also asking about if and how we're coordinating with other SME focused groups like the Project Management Institute, Ashra Gate, Zeta 2030, Project Drawdown, Chambers of Commerce, similar organizations. So long story short, yes. So we're not currently liaising with all of the organizations you mentioned, but some of them, and we have many other partners that we're in discussions with. Obviously, there's a lot happening in the sector. We have a global remit, so we just want to make sure that we build the right bridges and links with relevant organizations. Ultimately, it's important to say that we're all using the same framework. So we use the GHG protocol, for example, for our tools. So there's definitely alignment. And we know that there are other organizations who are developing other tools that are going to be great. So the idea is not for you to only focus on the tools that we have on the platform. We just want to make sure that the hub can act as a reference point for SMEs who currently have nowhere else to go or don't know where to get started. Ultimately, however, we think that the commitment can act as a reference point. So that's why we're liaising with not only these organizations, but also others, big institutions, multilateral organizations, to make sure that the commitment that we've created and that gives SMEs access to the Race to Zero can be used as an indicator, as a reference point for SME climate action. So we then have Julie, who signed up her company twice, but have not heard back. So sometimes it happens. So we normally send emails once you sign up that sometimes land in your spam folder. So really sorry to hear about these difficulties, Julie. Feel free to send us a note after this and we can check with the product team. Again, most of the time it's about, the problems are about spam folders. So hopefully it's going to be an easy fix, but thank you for flagging that. Now, is there a partnership? That's a very relevant one. Is there a partnership with SBTI for SMEs who use these tools? Now, SBTI for us is a sister initiative, really. And that also sits under the Women Business, Coalition umbrella. And so as such, we work with them. Now, our commitment is obviously aligned with science, and so is SBTI. We know that for SMEs starting from scratch, it's going to be easier maybe to start with a simpler commitment and simpler tools before they move on to more sophisticated targets. So, we'll see how we can divide and conquer with SBTIs, but it's obviously a very relevant initiative. Now, I know that my colleagues are focusing on specific questions that they've highlighted, so I'll have a look at that. How much time do we have maybe for questions? Can someone flag this in the chat box before I keep answering the questions?
2 to 3 minutes would be great. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And so I'll focus on the ones in the chat box now. Alors, we have a question about domestic end consumers. So in no country is more than a quarter of global warming caused by domestic end consumers. It's almost all business institutions and government, fossil emissions, extraction, exports and trade. What are good mechanisms for raising awareness and action in the big SME community? Well, that's certainly something that we're working towards with the hub in many ways. So we run communications campaign throughout the year. As I said before, we're currently partnering with other big stakeholders out there, from institutions, multilateral organizations, governments as well. We've been working with the UK government. Now in the US, we're working with America Zilin and other stakeholders, also focusing on other geographies. So that's part of the work that we try and do, raising awareness, not only within the SME community with our campaigns, but also within the wider ecosystem to make sure that other players start thinking about the support that SMEs will need to really take action. Because again, they're stretched, they're smaller, so they cannot expect it to go it alone. Now we have another question. A company of 10 people operating out of a serviced office in a small town in Oxfordshire reached out asking, we have no control over our energy usage or sourcing or even knowledge of our office-based energy use and emissions. We currently offset an estimate of our emissions, including travel and staff commuting, but would like to demonstrate we're reducing our footprint. Do you know of any initiatives that a small commercial landlord could be involved in, which could enable leaseholders to be more active net zero businesses? So you're absolutely right. We definitely need to have emissions by 2030. Offsetting is an interesting approach, but that shouldn't replace cutting emissions. So the idea is really to cut emissions as much as possible. As a rule of thumb, offsetting shouldn't go over 10% of your total emissions. So it's really important to make sure that you calculate this as much as possible, fully aware of the constraints that you're working with, but might be a good idea to start using the calculator. You will have seen that there are some sections of that tool where you can actually say that you don't know, you don't have the answer. So see what happens once you start using that tool, and then whether this can help you identify hotspots outside of building operations as well. There might be other areas of your business where you have more control over and where you can focus your efforts. And I think we're out of time. Maybe one last question. So thank you for clarifying that the tools are free. I'm just starting to consider dedicating time and bandwidth to reducing my emissions. However, will taking climate action result in large upfront costs? That's an excellent question. So some actions might require some investments. However, the assumption is that in the long run, they will also help you cut costs. And we'll hear in just a few minutes from small businesses that have gone down that pathway and who can provide some inspiration there. That said, there are often also like low to no cost actions that you can take to reduce emissions from, managing efficiency in your building, sometimes using sensors, or just, sometimes just closing your windows when you have your aircon on. There are some very simple things that can happen. Some might sound obvious, others are a bit more interesting. And that's why also we're working on action models to help SMEs identify the low-hanging fruits. So the actions that are really accessible, easy to take, and that can help move the needle on their emissions. I think we're going to have to stop here. I'm aware that there are other questions in the chat box, so apologies if we haven't had the time to cover them off, but we'll try and do so after the webinar. Now, this was hopefully a helpful session and a helpful demo. But now I think that we'll be able to move on to the really, really exciting part of this webinar, which is the moderated panel discussion with our fantastic SME representatives. So I would like to introduce them. We're incredibly lucky today to have representatives from Adore Me, Forster Communication, and El Saha. Please feel free to turn on your cameras as I introduce you all. So first of all, we have Laboni Saha, who's the founder and creative director of El Saha. She's a pro-planet entrepreneur. She's driven by craftsmanship, creativity, long-term impact of the fashion and luxury sector. She's an advocate of sustainable production, consumption, and also marketing of luxury goods. She founded El Saha in 2014 as a true luxury women's wear brand. We'll hear more about that in a few minutes. And she also established True Luxury Week, which is a consumer-facing platform that promotes changes for a better future within the luxury sector. With all these achievements, she's obviously received several accolades for her contribution, including a nomination for the British Fashion Awards in 2020 and the Change Makers Prize in 2021. So thank you so much for joining us, Laboni. We also have Ranjan Roy, who's joining us as VP of Strategy for Adore Me. So as such, Ranjan helps drive the brand's expansion. So this is another women's brand. He helps drive the expansion of Adore Me into new innovation and sustainability initiatives. Before Adore Me, he spent time in a variety of roles, media and technology roles. He used to run content personalization startup. He also worked as director at the Financial Times, so really varied experience. And now he's very thankful to be working at the intersection of this whole retail media technology. Really interesting role to have in such transformative times. So thank you for joining us, Ranjan, today. And last but certainly not least, Will Kirk from Forster Communications. So Will Kirk works as head of operations for this social change PR agency that uses communications to protect and improve lives. We'll be very happy to hear more about this, Will. You have a background in financial management and you're responsible for ensuring that Foster's meets its impact targets and also, engaging suppliers, employees, and the wider community at the same time, which is particularly interesting because in 2015, Foster's became a founding UK B Corporation. And since then, you've won 11 Best for the World awards for progressive business behavior. So quite impressive. And in 2020, Forster Communications also became the first communications agency to publish a climate positive plan. So once again, very curious to hear more in the next few minutes. So thanks again to you three for joining us today. I'm sure that our audience members are eager to hear about your own experience in taking climate action. So we have a few questions, obviously, for you, and maybe the first set of questions that it'd be helpful for us to start with are questions about how you got started, really. There's always a starting point. There's always a moment where a small business decides to, start this journey towards net zero emissions. So as we cover these off, it would also be great if you could use this opportunity maybe to say a few words about your industry, region, your emissions reduction goals as well, so that we can get a sense of where you're at. Suggest we start with Laboni, if that's fine with you. So would be fantastic to hear from you on what inspired you really to commit your company to become more sustainable and take action. Maybe there was a specific moment, maybe your business was directly affected by climate change. So please, would be great to hear more.
First of all, hello everyone, and thanks Pamela for having me on the panel. I think we started essentially in 2014 where I'd hit a point in my career where I could see through the processes in the fashion industry that were not the most sustainable. So I started El Saha essentially with the idea of introducing collections that were more sustainable by way of being timeless and by not following trends, and that way encouraging customers to be more mindful in the way they purchase and experience fashion products, so to say. So for me, I think the business didn't hit a point where we wanted to be more climate positive. For me, it was more me as an individual discovering, I would say the underbelly of the industry, which is can be very manipulative in its approach, how products are, produced and sold, and often we are often consumers are encouraged to impulse buy things, and things like that. So I think it was the idea of changing that perspective and the rule and cutting against the grain within the industry and introducing something that didn't follow the norms, so to say. And I think over, we started in 2014, but over the years, we did things sustainably, but there came a point where you realize that actually we've got to look at it and measure it in a scientific way and, be able to implement strategies that are actually giving us measurable goals. It's not just enough to say we use more than 70% of our materials that are certified sustainable. It's beyond that, right? Like you mentioned, looking at scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and what can we do to reduce those emissions in addition to creating products that are sustainable. So I think for us it was we started as a sustainable company, to answer your question, but the measuring and measuring our impact and, kind of setting out the strategies for improving our sustainable commitments was more towards, I would say, when we hit 2017, 2018, so 3-4 years into the business, where we really needed something measurable. And that's when we started looking at tools, etc., which could give us more tangible results as to where we were making a difference.
That's so interesting. Thank you, Leboni, for sharing this. So, even though you started your business as a sustainable company, there was a point when you realized that actually there was more to be done in terms of really looking at the operational aspects of your business, measuring emissions. So hopefully this will resonate with other businesses. So no matter the sector you work in, there are some steps that you need to take to really make sure that you can start working on your emissions in a meaningful way. So I'm going to turn to Ranjan and Will here, because obviously we'd love to hear from you as well. As we've heard in Ryan's introduction, small business owners have a lot going on. They've always had, but right now, the economic outlook is getting tougher. So it's harder than ever before for small businesses to add yet another project to the list, namely, taking common action, starting to work on their emissions. So could you please share a few thoughts on why you think it's important for small businesses to really play a role in combating the climate crisis? Maybe we can start with Ranjan.
Yeah, for us, so for a bit of background, Adore Me, we're based in New York. We're a direct-to-consumer women's wear brand founded in 2011. And actually, in juxtaposition to Leboni's story, we very openly were not founded as a sustainable brand. We, started in 2011. That was not the focus at all. And then in 2019, we kind of made a decision across management, across leadership, across the entire company that we would do everything we could to transform the company. And I think it's very important, even for us right now, we kind of hit the higher end of what a small and medium business is. We have about 450 employees, a couple of $100 million in revenue, but we've definitely been scaling, and we made this transformation from not being sustainable to becoming a certified B Corp actually just a few months ago. In the last few years, while scaling our business and almost doubling our revenue. So I think it's really important to show that a company can transform if they're incredibly intentional about it while they are growing. And we think it's very important, especially in the current economic climate, because making this transformation into becoming a much more sustainable business, I mean, the topic of measurement and the topic of what is the process towards that is clearly the focus of today. Every single thing you do makes you a better business. It makes you more disciplined in the way you do everything. We found that during COVID, we had already started a number of initiatives around our supply chain and better understanding where our products are coming from, where they are in the world, how to improve those processes from an environmental perspective. But then when COVID hit, I mean, in terms of managing the craziest supply chain experiences imaginable, we already had done all this legwork in terms of better knowing where and when our products would be arriving. And that made a huge difference in terms of actually being able to scale during the pandemic, which a lot of e-commerce brands did not actually do because they got hit on the logistics side. So I think for us, we saw firsthand how starting to really bring the discipline to your business that actually this kind of environmental effort demands can help you just be a better business overall. And I think especially going into the unpredictability of the next few years, I mean, or today as well, I think that's incredibly important.
That's really interesting to hear, Ranjan. So almost sounds like you're talking about the co-benefits of climate action, really. So, how climate action actually links back to other aspects of your business and how it all comes together, really. And you're right to talk about the vulnerability of small businesses. So, the pandemic obviously hit the SME community hard, but we know that going forward with, for example, extreme weather events is going to become even tougher for small businesses. We're going to see supply chain disruption. We're already seeing the inflation crisis, the energy prices that are going up. So, great to hear you talk about that discipline that's needed for climate action and how it can support SMEs in different ways. And I'm curious, Will, how does this compare with your own experience, really, with Forster Communications?
Hi everyone. Yeah, thanks for that. So we're in a kind of a different kind of position to Ranjan and Leboni. Really, we're a small service-based company. As you said, we're a social change PR agency, and we're 20 people in a small office in London. So our emissions are kind of tiny when you look at us as kind of an individual entity. And we've always, since we were set up 26 years ago, we've always measured our impact, and we've done kind of annual impact reports and sustainability reports within that. And it came to a head about 2019. We kind of declared a climate emergency along with business declares, and we looked at kind of the way we were reporting and what we were reporting on. And although we've been kind of collecting data for so many years, I think it helped focus the mind on what we needed to be looking at as an SME. So what we started doing, we started looking at our supply chain, because we're tiny and our emissions are tiny. But when you look at our supply chain, you start seeing where those emissions are coming from. So we started looking downstream. So we started looking at all our suppliers, and we sent out a supplier screening form, and we made a commitment that all our suppliers should be have net zero targets in place by April this year. So we ended up with 99% of our suppliers making that commitment. And now we're looking at our clients as well to make that commitment as well. But I think it's so important for SMEs to make this commitment. I mean, in the UK, I think I saw a stat the other day where employees at SMEs make up 75% of the workforce. And when you look at that related to the big companies who now have to report against government standards, which only have 20% of the workforce, when you've got 80% of the workforce that are SMEs, that's where the big difference is going to come from. Governments are hamstrung by all sorts of problems, but small businesses can make change. And actually, it doesn't have to be big and scary. It's just making those small incremental changes sometimes, which can really have a big knock-on effect.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Will. So we often use stats at the SME Climate Hub that say that small businesses, so SMEs, account for over 90% of businesses worldwide, and they employ 2 billion people. So that really gives an idea of the scale that we're talking about. So altogether, SMEs can have a massive impact, and obviously they need support, but they can also be very agile, innovative. So, they can definitely help us work towards net zero emissions. And Will, so it would be great now that we have a better understanding of how you all got started on your journey to net zero. Would be great to dive a little deeper and really understand what climate action means in practice for your businesses. Again, I'm sure that our audience is eager to learn even more about how you're approaching this in your respective companies. Will, you've already mentioned some of the first steps that your company took to reduce its emissions. So, looking at supply chains, for example, can you tell us a bit more about other steps, other low-hanging fruits that you focused your efforts on, and maybe, how the hub or other tools, other frameworks helped you do that as well?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, we're a founding UK B Corp, as you said, and using the B Corp community has been amazing for this. There's the Beehive, which is a great place for B Corps to share experiences and different policies you can put in place. But actually, the SME Climate Hubs, the tools on there are just amazing. There's the B Corp playbook. There's the Chapter Zero toolkit. There's almost too much information on there, but actually there are really good places to start. And the way it's laid out on the SME Climate Hub, it means you don't have to read the GHG policy documents, which I'm not going to lie are a little bit dry. But it is that there's a lot of information there, which is actually really easy to use. I think the best thing to think about is not only the emissions that your company has. So it's looking at the whole everything from business travel to commuting. I mean, we did a during COVID, obviously everyone went home and we were working from home, and our emissions in the office suddenly plummeted, and we were like, fantastic, we've reached where we need to be. And then we did a process of looking at our kind of the home working emissions, and kind of in conjunction with the company we use for our emissions measurement, and we realized that actually our emissions have gone up over that period, because when you've got 20 people working at home against 20 people sat in an office, suddenly you've got kind of those the emissions have kind of crept up a little bit. So we're working on how we can, now it's hybrid working, we're working on how we can look at kind of keeping our emissions down and keep people working at home and in the office. So it's a bit of a juggling act.
Yeah, it's not always as obvious as you would like it to be, right? So hence
very rarely.
Exactly. Hence the importance of, emissions measurement and being able to use tools such as, the calculator or others really that really can help you understand where your emissions hotspots are. So thank you so much, Will. That was definitely helpful. Now, why don't we turn to Ranjan, really? So you have a great business. We've heard more about your story. Now, looking specifically at your operations, what are the main sources of emissions in your company, really, and what actions are you taking to address those?
For us as a fashion company, I mean, emissions exist from the sourcing of the actual raw materials, to the production of the clothing, to the transport of the clothing, to the end use of the consumer, even trying to understand how much are they laundering the item and what kind of emissions exist on that side, to the fact that does the item get recycled in the end? What is the end of life process around the actual piece of clothing? So measurement is very difficult. Understanding impact to even start reducing it is incredibly difficult. And this is one thing, again, starting this process in 2019 and diving deep, the first thing, what are emissions? How do we understand this? Starting to explore what were very highly regarded industry standard measurement tools, which now are not so much. It was such a reminder through this entire process that small and medium-sized businesses should not be intimidated. We have dug into the actual measurement tools and more the open source processes of bigger fashion houses, and there's tons of inconsistencies. It is all incredibly difficult and new. And this is why the only thing you can do is just to get started today and to start to make kind of the value-based judgments around what are the things that you want to tackle. As Will just said, for a business like his, whether you're commuting to and from the office can be a huge part of it. And there are external factors that can help you kind of manage these processes and manage your emissions in those senses. Even for us, there's little things like, I mean, not little from an impact standpoint, sea shipping versus air shipping in fashion makes a huge difference. To send an item by boat, actually, it's about 1/25th the emissions of sending an item by air. But it's actually much more difficult because you have to get the item 6 to 8 months out. You have to begin that process versus air shipping. You can have an item in 10 days. And this is one of those things that it's cheaper to do sea shipping and it's a lower impact, but it makes inventory management much more difficult. So very early on, we were like, all right, if we really can hone in on our inventory management side, we can save money and reduce our emissions. But these are things that we even have found that a lot of companies don't actually take into account the transport element when they talk about their carbon footprint, which is clearly a huge part of it. They only talk about the production side. So I think I'm giving that as one example of where within our industry, where it is the topic du jour, there is no really accepted, widely understood framework around measurement, which means if you are just starting on this journey, if you're feeling intimidated by the fact that we haven't done this forever, I've read a million articles about companies that are publishing kind of nutritional labels of their carbon emissions. It should not be intimidating at all. This is a constant learning journey for every single company. And I honestly think the companies that are starting now are almost in an advantageous position because there's definitely more information out today and more to learn from and more tools like the normative calculator. So I think, the only thing you can do is to just get started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ranjan. And already like a great call to action there. Just get started. Like you'll get support
Get
along the
started.
way. And again, going back to what you were saying before about creating efficiencies in your business, looking at different aspects. This is something that any business needs to do, no matter the sector they operate in, like, the country they operate from. So we're all on this journey together. The important thing is to take the first step. So thank you so much for that. That said, we all want to take the first step, of course, but we do need to recognize that things aren't always easy. So we're very much aware that small businesses might have a few challenges to deal along the way, a few barriers to overcome. So Leboni, would love to hear from you on this. What are some of the challenges that your company faced? Maybe at the beginning of your climate journey, what were the tools or approaches that proved most helpful for you in overcoming these barriers? Do you have a few pointers for us?
I think kind of echoing what Ranjan already said with regards to being a fashion company or someone who creates consumer goods, there are always branches within our operations that oftentimes we don't have so much control over. And I think size-wise, we started as a really niche and independent brand. And I'm talking about early days where we would really need to negotiate with our suppliers and manufacturers about their sustainability practices to understand, what we stand for as a brand. Are they able to kind of stay in line with that? And where can we really make it meaningful for them to be more transparent with regards to what they're doing behind the scene when they're manufacturing a dress for us? Or, how many hours is it required for it to run the machine? Or what could we do to minimize waste of material when they're cutting it on the fabric? Or, so simple things like that. It goes down to as much as how the garment is wrapped before it's sent to us. So one of my biggest challenge was to get our suppliers to switch from putting garments in plastic sleeves and to actually wrap them in either tissue or paper-based material. So I think by 2019 we convinced people to actually remove all plastic packaging when they're sending us our manufactured garments. But the first couple of years, it was, us receiving hundreds of units of individual garments wrapped in plastic, not wrapped in, but covered in plastic sleeve. And we could do nothing about it. We didn't want to use plastic, but the suppliers, that's what they've been using. But thankfully, thanks to research and, new innovation material, there are materials which act like plastic as a protective cover, but actually are not plastic. And we've also been able to redirect our suppliers to, sources where they can purchase paper hangers as opposed to plastic hangers, alternative packaging to send us manufactured goods. But I think where we really took it to the next level as a brand is where we started producing things at our atelier in London, where we started hand making some of the things, which really helps you control emissions. The moment you switch on a machine to make a product, we're talking about emissions at a different level. But we tested, utilizing waste material from our other product lines to make new products, which are handmade and often requires doesn't even require switching on lights or something like that, because we utilize daylight as a natural resource. So those are areas where we try to experiment. It seems like, it can't be applied, but actually, if you're looking at, a 6,000 square foot manufacturing floor, if they were able to utilize glass panels or solar panels to run their glass windows to utilize daylight, but also solar panel to replace their regular electric energy with solar power, or as other forms of alternative energy, I think there could be a much better way of manufacturing. So I think to make it, not to go into too much detail, I think as a younger company, our initial challenges were to get our suppliers on board with the same message, because everybody's striving for better percentage in their margins, better profitability. But I think since 2014 to 2017, it was more challenging. But as we started becoming, I would say, a little bit more I would say well known or recognized in the industry, suppliers would listen to us more. But my second season, people were like, you're too young. We don't have time for you. Or I wouldn't even be able to reach the right people who were making decisions, because it is how it is. It's scale speaks, and people will only listen to you when you're able to give them, I would say, a meaningful, and I would say what they're striving for ultimately is profitability, etc.
That's brilliant, Laboni. And it was making me think. So there's a lot of talking at the moment around global supply chains of big multinationals, how these big corporates, big companies need also to support the suppliers, educate their suppliers. But the truth is, and you're a great example, this also applies to smaller businesses. You need to work with your business partners, with your suppliers, to bring them onto the journey. And so when we talk to big corporates, we encourage them to redirect their suppliers to the hub. Well, I would have the same piece of advice for smaller companies. If you're using the hub and you like the resources and tools that we offer, just tell your suppliers to come check out the hub as well, right? And also I noted the importance of innovation and research, of course. Now, we have a few more minutes left, and I think I'd love for us to focus on one aspect of climate action that I'm sure will be of interest to our audience members, namely the business benefits of taking action on climate. And I'm sure you three have a lot to say on this topic. So maybe, Laboni, let's stay with you for a couple of minutes. Could you tell us about some of the upsides to the action that you've taken to cut emissions in your business? So the benefits that you're already seeing, and maybe the future benefits that you're expecting as well.
So the first and foremost, I think we've always strived to be more transparent within our systems. So at the very beginning, we were saying who made the garment, their name, and where they made it, and things like that. But the more action we take towards being climate positive, I think the transparent messages become more appealing to the end consumer. And we still have customers who are buying the product for what the product is rather than looking into the climate message within it. But we know there is a much wider audience who's looking at the product, at the climate message, even if they're not buying the product, so to say. So I think the part that's most appealing to me as a founder of the company is that we are able to set the tone, so to say, for many other businesses who are probably kind of on the fence about taking climate action or not, because we started so small. Literally, I started in my tiny apartment in Fulham, and I was like only 2 years after I graduated. I didn't start with a big capital. So if we could make small but meaningful changes that are reflected on our product and also in the messaging behind the product, so if someone's buying a silk dress from us, they would be advised not to dry clean it every time. They would be advised to air dry it and hand wash it. So things like that, it doesn't have to be rocket science. Sometimes it's just being more simple, but going back to the roots as well. How did our predecessors, how did they look after their clothes? They had very few to take care of, but they were being more natural in their approach, and we can do that even in our modern lives. So I think those were the more relatable, but kind of not so widely used ways of promoting your business. But I think going forward, the incentive always is for the next generation. As a woman, I always think about the safety of the next generation, maybe our unborn children, our grandchildren, and so forth. So if we do our bit to make the business climate positive, hopefully our next generation will live in a safe planet. And I think it's a no-brainer. I think it's and I also very strongly believe that we need to all come together to make this message relevant, because safety of the planet and how we live is very, very crucial. It's like having drinking water or not, So, and I think this. Although we are a small team, I take time out of my calendar to speak about these things, and like today's webinar, but also we did a campaign at COP27 where we actually did announce some call to actions for governments and policy writers to actually bring to the forefront where can we operate as a better industry collectively, because a single business can't make all the change, and and all the businesses need to come together, and that also includes our suppliers and their suppliers, and going down to the fields where the crop is produced, where cotton is being produced, where silk is being farmed, etc. So
Yeah, thank you, Leboni. Once again, some very clear messages and benefits there. I'll refrain from making any comments because I'm conscious of the time, and I just want to give Ranjan and Will a minute to also talk about the business benefits that they're seeing. So, Will, maybe we can start with you. So, as we've heard from some of our audience members, well, small businesses often work with tight budgets. They're worried about their profits, increasing costs. So how can they take climate action without jeopardizing all of this, in your experience?
There's always going to be a cost implication, I think, be it kind of the actual cost of kind of the change that's happening, or kind of the time that kind of is taken by kind of getting up to speed. I'm sure Ranjan would agree, kind of when he started in 2019, it's kind of that massive kind of learning curve of kind of getting from kind of zero to hero, I guess. And so there is a cost implication, but I think rather than thinking what's the cost of doing this, I think it's better to look at what's the cost of not doing this. We're in a phase of the world development where it's a tipping point, and if we don't take action now, it's going to be too late. And already we're seeing with a lot of our big clients and with kind of government clients that procurement are looking for SMEs to work with who have made those climate commitments. And if you haven't made those climate commitments, you're going to be left behind. So you have to make a start on it, even if it's only kind of just starting to measure your impact. I think it's really vital that everyone takes this seriously, and just as Ranjan said, just get going. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but you have to make that first step.
Thank you. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense, and hopefully will also resonate with the people who are joining us today. And Ranjan, I'm going to turn to you. Obviously, we've heard a lot from Leboni and Will, and from you as well, on how you balance your business priorities and the need to take climate action. Any additional thoughts there on the balance between the two?
We don't sell sustainable products at a higher price than non-sustainable products. And right now, about 35% of the products on our website are considered sustainable by industry standards. And that was a decision we made very purposefully. And it's tough, but it's not only the right thing to do, we actually think it's going to be the long-term beneficial for our business decision to make. And we know this, or we feel more confident in this because, one story that kind of parallels a lot of this journey is in 2013, we were the first intimate apparel brand to bring extended sizing and plus sizing across all categories. And it was tough. Actually, the supplier conversations that Leboni was talking about, none of our suppliers were actually making plus size products. So we had to go to separate suppliers, but instead we started working, and we were pretty small at that time, with our existing suppliers and trying to educate them and being like, you have to move in this direction. And it actually created amazing relationships because it became a much bigger part of the market. And now we're actually doing the same thing around sustainability with those same suppliers. So we saw how by working and educating with your stakeholders together, you actually can create markets and create better ways of doing business. And I mean, I am personally 100% convinced with sustainability, this is just the future. I kind of always think about back to digital transformation circa 2008, 2010, the way businesses were talking about it or thinking about it. I think that's the way sustainability transformations will go. And at a certain point, I mean, nowadays, if you're starting a business, being embedded into Google Docs or, us having a webinar on Zoom, this digital word is almost, it just doesn't exist anymore. It's just part of everything you do. I think the same will happen with sustainability and being more environmentally conscious and understanding your impact from a regulatory standpoint, from a customer demand standpoint, from just an operational standpoint. So I think, again, we are all repeating to get started, but I think at a certain point, it will be an incredible business advantage. The companies that know how to do it the same way. If you started like us as a digital native in 2011, it gave us a huge advantage versus traditional retailers over the past decade. I think the same is going to happen with sustainability.
Wonderful. So in a nutshell, sustainability is the future. Get on board now, or you're going to be left behind. Maybe that's a good way to wrap up. I want to make sure that we keep some time for the questions that the audience has asked for you all. So we have about 10 minutes to do that. So let's see what we have. First, we have a question that Ranjan might be able to answer. So I'm going to read it out loud. At my company, we're just starting to set a route for climate action. I would like to know, based on your experience, where would you recommend starting before setting net zero goals?
Well, actually, I mean, one thing, the way I really like how the SME Climate Hub, how everything was laid out was step one, make a public commitment. And again, it sounds like, I know, especially in climate action, everyone talks about how everything is talk and how, everyone's just making these bold proclamations. But I actually do publicly holding yourself accountable in some way has to be a starting point. And it's a good one because, again, everything will only get more complicated after that and more, then the real battle starts. But at least starting from that point. And then I think just starting to educate yourself again, I think if there's one lesson overall I have for small and medium businesses is don't be intimidated. And I know that's what the theme of the day, you will be left behind, get started now. But I guess number 3, don't be intimidated and just try to learn as much as you can because it's intellectually very interesting. It's existentially important for the planet. I think it's an incredible area to get more involved in. So start with as public proclamation and then start using the tools available, digging through the research available, and just learning as much as you can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ranjan. Let's see if we can ask a question to Will as well. Will, I think there's an audience member who was really interested in hearing from you on how your company is getting its employees to that are working from home to measure their emissions. So what's the approach there?
Thanks. So that's an interesting one. So we work with a carbon calculator company to help us kind of match all our our data up. And we were looking at it and kind of talking with them on kind of how to do it. Because obviously it's very hard to kind of say, well, you're working from 8 till 7 that day. So let's look at your your electric meter and see how much electricity you use. It's just not going to happen. So what we do, we send around a questionnaire to all the staff every quarter, where we know how long how many days they've worked at home, because we've got a chart for who works at home and who works in the office. And then from there, we work out how much time they're spending at home, how many extra hours they have the heating on, and various other things. So there's kind of a set formula for the way we calculate it, and then that then spits out the results. I mean, we can't claim that it's 100% accurate, but it does give a good portrayal of where we are.
Amazing. So maybe some inspiration there for our audience members. And talking about inspiration, Laboni, I think that all that you're doing with El Saha has definitely grabbed the attention here. And we have a very specific question for you about sustainable fabrics. So we'd like to know, what are the most sustainable fabrics? And does embedded CO2 in raw materials feed into decisions?
So there is no one very sustainable material. I think a sustainable material is one that comes from nature without causing too much impact on it and can go back into nature without causing too much impact on it. So anything natural fiber that is, produced in a low impact manner, reducing pesticides, controlled water used in the process of making the textile is sustainable. But again, if you're going to sell thousands of that cotton material dress and customers will buy it and not use it to its full capacity and throw it away, it's not sustainable. So a material is as sustainable as at the production stage, but also at the consumption stage. So we share that sustainability responsibility with the end consumer, which is why I think a big focus on the industry should be fairly pricing products. A cotton t-shirt that's sold at £5 is actually not a cheap product because it takes the natural resource from the nature. And also, you know, it may not be used to its full capacity because it was a cheap product to buy, but actually there's a human aspect of making it and, you know, dyeing it and all of the rest. So without deviating too much from the question, natural fabrics, in my opinion, are most sustainable. But as a business, when we make our material choices, we go for certifications. So certifications give an indication as to what happened behind the scene when the material was being made. But we use our fair judgment to see, you know, if an upcycled or recycled polyester fabric is releasing microfibers when it's being washed or not. And we try to deviate from anything that's polyester based for that reason, because polyester could be a recycled polyester, but still sometimes causes impact during its life cycle by releasing microfibers that we cannot see with our naked eyes, but impacts the marine life quite a lot. And when the garment gets disposed, it may take up to 200 years to decompose in nature, which is not a good thing for nature. So I think it's using your judgment. And I think that anyone who's a fashion consumer in this room, I would really request you to look at the label of the garment and what it's made of. And natural material is always better than, in the long term, better than anything that's synthetic or polyester.
Thanks, Laboni. Some really clear pointers there, and also a good reminder that climate action is not only about operations, but also about value chain education, right? From suppliers to consumers. Great. I'm going to go back to Ranjan. We have a question that you might be able to help with. So did your business experience any pushback or incentives from investors or customers to take climate action? So going back to this idea of incentives, business benefits, do you have specific examples there?
Oh, that is a very interesting question for us, especially on the investor side. There was initial hesitation and resistance because we had investors who had been with us since the founding, and this was such a divergent path. But you know, everyone saw where the world was going, and so overall was supportive. The question was just, can you simply execute on this vision? The customer side for us is a really interesting one, and I think this could be relevant to a lot of people. Our customers are not typical sustainable fashion shoppers. We're proudly mass market. We're not cheap, but products range $40 to $80, and we reach the average American consumer. And we have actually seen backlash and negative responses to marketing our products sustainably. The ones that actually incorporate better types of materials, the ones that are made in a better way, people will email us. And I know sometimes it's almost shocking when we talk to people more within the sustainability focused community. So it creates this really interesting challenge and opportunity for us, because from a mission standpoint, it gets us more excited, because we're like, this is the group that you have to have shopping better to actually make an impact at scale, especially within sustainable fashion. It is developed in a very niche way over the last 12, 15, 20 years. And that's why the average consumer still does not gravitate towards it, or even has a negative reaction because they feel excluded. And we've definitely seen it, the way we communicate to consumers has been a very interesting thing, because we're not outright overtly marketing it, but we see kind of almost interesting things. Like one of my favorite reviews around a product that actually used recycled nylon was someone was comparing it to, they remember when recycled paper first came out in the 2000s and how it felt rougher, and how that made them a little nervous about purchasing a product that had recycled materials. And then it actually felt very comfortable, and that made them happy. So it was this perfect example to me. It's one of my favorite things that I've read of someone who's not environmentally first in line type of consumer who's starting to understand that there are slightly better ways to do everything, and everything is on a plane, and and it's a journey for every single person. So I think for us, that customer question is a really interesting one. It's at the forefront for everything we do, because we think that to really make an impact at scale, we have to understand that there's a large consumer base that is not emotionally and philosophically gravitating towards shopping sustainably or the environmental movement, but we have to get them on board if we're going to actually make an impact. And it's a challenge, but it's an exciting one for us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ranjan. I'm aware that we only have a couple of minutes left. So I wanted maybe to use one of the last questions that were asked to go back to Leboni and Will. This is about, again, we're talking about business benefits. So are there prizes, awards, and recognition for your excellent climate work? So it would be great to hear from you both. And maybe before I pass on the mic to you both, I'm just going to highlight that there are already business benefits that SMEs can leverage through the hub. So we've created badges, for example, for committed SMEs for use to use online, their social media profiles, websites. We have case studies. We pitch SMEs from our community as spokespeople to event. We run comms campaigns with them. So that obviously helps in terms of recognition. But if you could say just a few words, both of you, if there are any specific prizes for the work that you do. So, Will, do you want to go first?
I mean, there are no specific prizes really. I mean, there are awards within kind of the PR kind of environment which cover sustainability, and we like to think we're kind of at the forefront of that. But the biggest thing for us is just getting other people on that journey. That's the biggest recognition and prize we want. Fantastic.
Leboni.
In fashion, actually, there are quite a lot of awards around sustainability. And I think, one of the nomination you mentioned from the bio from British Fashion Award also takes into account sustainable practices within the business. So within fashion, there are quite a few. We won one called the Luxonomy Award, which is from Spain, which is specifically for sustainable luxury. But there are increasing number of existing awards like the British Fashion Awards or CFDA and a few other platforms that are making sustainability focus awards, just to acknowledge brands that do that. So yeah, within fashion space, there is quite a lot of awards around sustainability, thankfully.
Great. So yet another reason, if you're an SME working in that sector, to get started on your journey to net zero. I know we're at time, so I'm going to have to thank you all for the time that you spent with us today. This was an incredibly insightful and interesting discussion, even for us, and we work with you, we work with SMEs, but I think that you were able to provide some really, really good background and inspiration also for all the businesses who joined us today. And if you're in the audience, I would definitely encourage you to go check out the hub, see if you feel like making the commitment, using our tools. We'll obviously be following up also with a recording and some additional materials for you to have a look at. But we certainly hope you enjoyed the webinar today, and that we'll see you soon on the hub. So thanks again to you all.